so much. I am just so delighted to be here today, and thank you so much to our organizers for putting this together. It is a treat to have a room full of people thinking about these important concepts. So I'm just going to share a little bit of research that we've done at the Center for Media Engagement, thinking about how it is that you establish pro-social norms in digital spaces. And to start with, I just want to lay out what we're trying to ward against, or the problems that you might envision in this space. And when there's antisocial content in these digital spaces, the concerns include that it might affect people's participation decisions. If you're more reserved, having a space that's filled with toxicity may make you tune out altogether, whereas it might cause some people to join into the fray. It affects how people think about the hosting site. So if you're a newsroom and there's lots of incivility in your comment section, it can actually affect what people think about the newsroom itself. And then finally, and I think to a concerning degree, the tenor of the comments that are left in a digital space can influence what people think about public opinion. So whether they're consciously doing it or not, they're referencing this comment section space as this is what the public believes. And the consequence of that can be heightened polarization and many other influential attitudes. So some of the work that we've been doing is testing interventions to improve digital spaces. So what is it that we can actually do to change the tenor of the conversation in these spaces? And I've divided it in the talk today into changes that you might make to the architecture. So how is it that you could change the look and feel of a space that might affect the way in which people engage? And then second, the interaction. So who posts and how it is that they're engaging in the conversation can influence how other people are behaving. And so what I'm going to do today is just give you a brief review of a couple of studies that we've done in each of these spaces. I'm going to do a very non-academic thing and not include all of the limitations to these studies. And I will say at the outset, they all have limitations. So please take this as a more provocative start than this is the end-all, be-all. So first is we did some work where we partnered with Gannett newsrooms, and what we did is just change what happened in comment sections across their site. So across these 24 newsrooms, we had some of them, they were using Facebook comments, so they retained Facebook comments. Some others switched to Coral, which is a commenting platform. It was developed as a collaboration between Mozilla, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. We had a third group of newsrooms that switched to Coral, but only for subscribers to the news organization, so it limited who was able to access and include comments on the site. Or finally, we just had newsrooms turn off the comments altogether so that that deliberative space was removed. And some of the things that we found from this study were, first, when you turn off the comments, users spent less time on the site compared to sites that continued using Facebook commenting. There was something that drew people to these spaces. However, interestingly, we did surveys before and after, and most people did not notice that the comments were turned off, which is not the most encouraging finding for those that want to create these spaces. Of those who did notice, most of them felt that turning off the comments made the experience worse. When the newsroom switched from Facebook commenting to Coral, I think this is the more interesting finding for this group today, is that the comments were generally less toxic, so it actually did affect the substance of comments that were being left in this space. Engagement increased for those sites that switched to Coral, and commenters, unfortunately, felt more disconnected from the other commenters. The rationale for this is they didn't know those handles, so it was a change in people's handles, so we presume that that might be why that occurred. And journalistic feedback, they really were positive about the switch to Coral. They thought that it improved the comment section overall and that they were getting to know their readers. And I think the takeaway from this is that the design of the space can actually matter for how people are interacting in it. In another study that we did, it was an experimental study. We gave people the exact same comment section, and the only thing we switched was whether the button available there was like or respect. And what we found is that the respect button actually can change what people do in the space. So something as simple as a label on a button can change how people interact. And in this study, a respect button, either it had no effect or it resulted in less partisan reactions to social posts compared to a like button. My third example of architecture is I've really become intrigued by this concept of depth to scale, which is the idea that as online spaces get bigger and bigger, you get scale, but how can you get the depth of people getting to know each other and people really connecting? And I think that's such an important question. Someone mentioned something related to that in the intros, and I was like, yes, we got to talk more about that. So in this study, we partnered with the Weeds, and this is a Vox podcast, and their online digital group had gotten really large, 21,000 members. And they were concerned that they were having this issue that they had scale, but they didn't have depth. And so we partnered with them, and for a group of people that volunteered to be part of this study, we had half of them start to discuss in small Facebook Messenger groups, and then others continue their participation in the large Facebook group. And when people were in those smaller groups, when it was smaller and more constrained, posts were seen as more civil and more respectful of others' views in that Messenger application rather than the large Facebook group. So I think this shows that there are some trade-offs perhaps in depth to scale. Do you have a lot of depth and people getting to know each other, or do you have scale? And I think it's worth thinking through more, is there a way to maximize both? Okay. In terms of interaction, we've done some studies where we are looking at how exactly is it that people communicate in these spaces. So are there particular styles or particular uses of language that might help to bring people together rather than to lead them to polarize or disconnect with one another? And so we did a study where we created counter-attitudinal comments, and we varied the degree of humility in these comments. And you can think of humility in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different discussions of what humility means. In this particular study, we were looking at signals of openness to different perspectives, signals that you might be wrong, signals that you were willing to hear a point of view that might not agree with your own. And in this experimental study, what we found is that when the counter-attitudinal comments contained more humility, people evaluated them more positively, and they evaluated the commenter more positively. And the thing that I really love about the study is that the results were the same for those with right and left-leaning views. So this seems to be a type of language that can appeal to people regardless of their political identity. In another study, and this one doesn't have the same sort of optimistic conclusion, but I bring it up anyway because I think it's a really important one to keep in consideration. So we investigated whether politically heterogeneous parenting subreddits could be a space for creating connection across divides. There's also all sorts of literature suggesting that this can happen, that bringing people together can help them reduce prejudice, even if they have different partisan inclinations. But there's also literature suggesting that exposure to politically opposing views can increase polarization. And what we found is that when politics came up in these parenting subreddits, people evaluated the subreddit more negatively. So I think this just urges some caution if we're looking to non-political spaces to bring people together across political divides. Final one here, we did a study where we partnered with a local politics reporter, and when this reporter was engaging respectfully on Facebook, it resulted in 15% reduction in incivility and increased the provision of evidence by about 15%. Didn't happen when it was a generic station logo. It was really the recognizable local reporter that created a difference in the space. So in sum, the architecture of digital spaces and the substance of the interactions, who's there and what they're saying, really affect what people believe and what they do. And some interventions can really help to establish prosocial norms.